Good morning, afternoon, evening or night to all of you depending on your time. This is the second part of the 6th episode of the series called Laptop Liquid Loop, or the Triple L project for short. We are continuing to make the LLL casing, which will house all of the components, including the radiator, the fans, the fan controller, the power supply and the tube run. In the last video I've cut all of the panels and put almost all of the holes that we'll need. In this video I'm going to use the sheet metal bender to bend the panels into shape, work on the controller mount, pump mount and pump window, as well as the fan mesh. The fan mesh mount is a little unusual, but I'll explain that when we get there. I'm also going to do my best in this video to explain everything that I'm doing, since I think it was a bit unclear in the last video with the simple time-lapse. Bending the panels is very simple. I've cut the front panel together with the side panels and put two 90-degree bends and then bent the side slopes. I'll leave the top panel unbent for now to make it easier to put the pump mount holes and window. The pump mount and window will be milled out. The pump came with a little sticker which shows where exactly the holes need to be drilled. Using that, the milling was very simple to do. I've offset the pump mount and window slightly to the back to ensure that the pump doesn't interfere with the fan controller. Speaking of which, the fan controller mount is quite basic. So I've cut the long flaps on each side of the controller because we're not using these to mount it, and then added a very small aluminum flaps instead. These will prevent the controller from falling out of the casing. The frame of the controller is just wide enough to stop the controller from falling into the casing, so just these little flaps are enough to hold the controller in place. Finally, the fan mesh mount. I spent some time thinking how I want the fan mesh to be attached to the casing. The obvious method would be to just use some screws with the fan mesh positioned outside the casing. I wasn't very happy about this method because it has some problems. Firstly, it means that every time I want to remove the mesh, I'd need to unscrew 4 to 6 screws. I like to keep my fans clean, so the time spent unscrewing and screwing back the fan mesh would add up. Secondly, if the fan mesh is outside of the casing, the edges of the mesh would be prone to bending when I transport it. Considering the edges are quite sharp, it would not be a very nice experience. Positioning the mesh on the inside isn't really an option either, because if I do that, I would need to open up the casing just to remove the fan mesh. So I decided to go for something a little unusual. I've milled out a long thin slot on the side of the casing. The fan mesh will slot in from there. The right end of the mesh will be connected to a little steel flap bent 90 degrees, and I'll attach some magnets to the side of the casing. This way the mesh won't just randomly fall out, and yet will be easy to remove just by sliding it out. There is also going to be 2 rails between the fan mesh and the fans to provide a clear path for the fan mesh and to prevent it from pumping into the fans every time I slide it in. That's pretty much the casing done. The tube run will be done in the next video because I think it deserves a video of its own. One thing you may be wondering is why there is no back panel at all. Well, the thing with the back panel is that it will need to be made together with support. The mechanism for the support isn't quite as simple as cutting and bending, and I think I better leave that for after I've done the water block and I've done some testing. Another thing I want to mention before ending this video: I applied liquid metal to my laptop about 6 months ago, and it seems it's no good anymore. My GPU temps are starting to hit 90 degrees C. Interestingly, the CPU temps are actually better than before, at about 89 to 90 degrees C compared to 95 degrees C. This is probably because my application of liquid metal was better on the CPU, so the liquid metal still works on the CPU but not on the GPU, meaning the copper pipes can transfer more heat from the CPU by sacrificing the GPU. Just an interesting thought. Regardless though, I'm going to reapply liquid metal in a couple of days because gaming is literally impossible at the moment. The GPU starts heavily throttling as soon as it hits 90C, and the FPS goes down from 150 to about 30, turning the game into a lagfest. Let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see a video about a liquid metal application on a laptop. We'll have a look at how liquid metal looks after 6 months of very active gaming as well. Alright, that's the end of the second part of the 6th episode of the LLL project. You can check the description below for my social media links. I post updates there as well. Do comment if you have any questions or suggestions. I read and reply to everyone. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next part.